Hello everyone, welcome to Russian Explained. Here we talk about Russian language grammar tips and of course some cultural insights. My name is Faruk and I'm a Russian native speaker, so I'm here guys to help you master your Russian skills. And today we're going to talk about verbs of motion, one of the most challenging yet fascinating topics in Russian grammar. Motion verbs help describe travels, walks, and movement in a space. Whether you're walking, running, flying, or driving, the Russian language has a unique way of describing these actions with what we call verbs of motion. But here's the twist. These verbs don't just describe how you move, they also capture direction, frequency, and even intention. In English, we might just say, I'm going to the store, or I go to the store. But in Russian, the choice of verb changes depending on whether you're making the trip once, repeatedly, or if you're already on your way. Sounds complicated? Don't worry. In this lesson, I'll break it all down for you. Today, you will learn what motion verbs are and why they are so important, the difference between unidirectional and multidirectional verbs, and when to use each one, how motion verbs interact with the tricky concept of verb aspect, perfective and imperfective forms. By the end of this lesson, you will not only understand these verbs, you'll start to feel confident using them to describe your everyday actions in Russian. Ready to take your Russian to the next level? Let's dive in. Motion verbs in Russian are a special category of verbs that describe movement from one place to another. Unlike many other languages, Russian adds a layer of nuances to these verbs by focusing on how and when the movement happens. These verbs aren't just about the action. They're about direction, purpose, and the nature of movement itself. For example, are you moving in one specific direction? Or maybe you're moving back and forth or in multiple directions? Are you describing single trip or repeated journeys? Let's start with a few common examples of motion verbs. Идти and ходить. To go on foot. Я иду в магазин. I'm going to the store. Я хожу в магазин каждую неделю. I go to the store every week. Ехать and ездить. To go by vehicle. Мы едем в Москву. So we are going to Moscow. Мы часто ездим в Москву. So we often travel to Moscow. Лететь and летать. To fly. Птицы летят на юг. The birds are flying south. Птицы летают над озером. The birds fly over the lake. At first glance, it seems simple, but these verbs actually have many nuances in Russian language. One of the most distinctive features of Russian motion verbs is their division into unidirectional and multidirectional forms. This distinction allows speakers to convey not only the act of moving, but also the type and purpose of that movement. Let's dive deeper into these two categories. Unidirectional verbs describe movement in a single specific direction or toward a particular destination. These verbs are used when you are focusing on one trip or action. The movement is happening right now or in the near future. Let's see some examples. Идти. To go on foot. Я иду в магазин. I'm going to the store. So here, you're walking to the store in one specific direction. Ехать. To go by vehicle. Мы едем на вокзал. So we are driving to the station. So this action is happening in the present and the focus is on a single trip. Лететь. To fly. Самолет летит в Москву. The plane is flying to Moscow. This one is the specific journey in progress. And of course, some key points. Use unidirectional verbs when describing current or planned actions. These verbs emphasize the destination and direction of movement. Multidirectional verbs describe repeated, habitual, or non-specific movement. They are also used when the movement occurs back and forth or in multiple directions, or maybe you are referring to an action as a general fact, not tied to a specific moment. Check this. Ходить. To go on foot. Я хожу в магазин каждую неделю. I go to the store every week. This describes a habitual action. Летать. to fly. Птицы летают над полем. So the birds are flying over the field. And here we have movement in multiple directions without a specific destination. Let's see some key points. Use multidirectional verbs for habitual or general actions. These verbs are ideal for describing movement in multiple directions or repeated trips. To better understand the difference, let's compare them side by side. Unidirectional verbs focuses on one direction. Multidirectional verbs focus on habitual or repeated movement. Unidirectional describes specific or ongoing actions. Multidirectional describes general facts or routines. Я иду в школу. I'm going to school. Я хожу в школу каждый день. I go to school every day. Мы летим на юг. We are flying south. Мы часто летаем на юг. We often fly south. Let's have a look on mistakes. Mistake number 1. Mixing up unidirectional and multidirectional verbs. Incorrect form. Я хожу в кино сейчас. I'm walking to the cinema now. Correct form will be Я иду в кино сейчас. So, for a single trip, use unidirectional verbs like иду. Mistake number 2. Using unidirectional verbs for habits. Incorrect. Мы едем в университет каждый день. So we go to the university every day. Correct form will be мы ездим в университет каждый день. So we go to the university every day. For repeated actions, use multidirectional verbs like ездим. I'll give you some tips. Practice recognizing whether the movement is specific and directional or habitual and general. A good rule of thumb. Unidirectional, one trip or in a progress. Multidirectional, repeated or indefinite. Choosing the correct verb helps you to sound more natural in Russian. Imagine if you are telling someone about your daily routine or a trip you are planning. Using the wrong verb might confuse your listener or even change the meaning of what you are trying to say. By mastering this distinction, you'll not only improve your grammar, but also gain a confidence in describing movement and routines clearly and accurately. In Russian, every verb has two aspects, imperfective and perfective. These aspects tell us whether the action is ongoing, repeated, or completed. When it comes to motion verbs, aspect plays a crucial role in expressing the nature or completion of movement. Let's break it down step by step. Imperfective aspect describes actions that are ongoing, habitual, or incomplete. Think of it as focusing on a process. Perfective aspect describes actions that are completed and emphasize the result. Imperfective verbs focus on actions in progress. For example, я иду в магазин. So I'm going to the store. Habits or repeated actions. Я хожу в магазин каждую неделю. I go to the store every week. General facts or abilities. Я умею ездить на велосипеде. I know how to ride a bike. Perfective verbs focus on completed actions. Я сходил в магазин. I went to the store and came back. The start or result of an action. Он побежал в парк. He started running to the park. Мы слетали в Париж на выходные. We flew to Paris for the weekend. How to form perfective verbs from imperfective ones? Most perfective motion verbs are formed by adding prefixes to the imperfective ones. The prefix you use can add additional meaning, such as emphasizing direction, completion, or a change in a state. Let's see some common prefixes. Prefix по – to start moving. Идти – пойти. To go – to set off on foot. Ехать – поехать. To drive – to set off by vehicle. For example, я пойду в парк завтра. I will set off for the park tomorrow. Prefix s to complete a round trip. Ходить – сходить. To go and return by foot. Ездить – съездить. To go and return by vehicle. For example, я сходил в магазин. I went to the store and I came back. Prefix в or вы to enter or to exit. Идти – войти. to go in. Идти, выйти, to go out. For example, она вошла в комнату. She entered the room. Prefix при or prefix у, to arrive or to leave. Ехать, приехать, to arrive by vehicle. Ехать, уехать, to leave by vehicle. For example, поезд уехал в 10 утра. The train left at 10 a.m. Imperfective aspect focus on the action itself or its process. Perfective aspect focuses on the result or completion. Imperfective aspect describes habits, repeated actions, or facts. Perfective aspect describes one-time actions or achievements. Я иду в университет. I'm going to the university. This one is imperfective form. Я сходил в университет. I went to the university and I returned. This one is perfective form. Let's have a look on common mistakes and how to avoid them. Mistake number 1. Using perfective verbs for ongoing actions. Incorrect one. Я пойду в магазин сейчас. I will set off to the store now. The correct will be Я иду в магазин сейчас. I'm going to the store now. Mistake number 2. Using imperfective verbs for completed actions. Incorrect one. Я ходил в кино вчера. I went to the cinema yesterday. Sounds incomplete. Correct one will be Я сходил в кино вчера. I went to the cinema yesterday and I came back. Here's a tip. Think about the focus of your sentence. Is it about the action or process? Then use imperfective one. Is it about the result or completion? In this case, use perfective one. Mastering aspect in motion verbs allows you to convey subtle differences in meaning that don't exist in English. For example, the difference between saying I went to the store and I went to the store and I came back is easily expressed in Russian through this aspect. By understanding these nuances, you'll sound more fluent, precise, and natural when speaking Russian. Russian motion verbs are considered one of the most challenging aspects of the language for learners. And it's not hard to see why. They combine several layers of complexity that require learners to juggle directionality, frequency, aspect, and prefixes, all at the same time. Let's break down why this topic is so tricky and how to approach it step by step. Unlike English, where verbs like to go or to walk can be used in a variety of contexts without much change, Russian motion verbs encode detailed information about the action. A single verb choice in Russian can reveal directionality. Are you going in one direction or back and forth? Frequency. Is this a one-time trip or habitual action? The aspect. Is the action is ongoing, completed, or about to begin? For example, Я хожу в магазин. I go to the store regularly. Я иду в магазин. I'm going to the store now. Я сходил в магазин. I went to the store and I came back. Each sentence uses a different verb to convey subtle yet crucial distinction in meaning. This level of specificity can feel overwhelming to learners. When prefixes are added to motion verbs, they can completely change the meaning. For instance, идти – to go on foot, войти – to enter, выйти – to exit, перейти – to cross, ехать – to go by vehicle, приехать – to arrive by vehicle, уехать – to leave by vehicle. This creates a large number of verb variations that learners must memorize and understand. To make matters more difficult, many prefixes carry multiple meanings depending on the context. For example, Я зашел в магазин. I stopped by the store. Я вышел из магазина. I came out of the store. Я подошел к магазину. I approached to the store. Directionality, unidirectional or multidirectional, often overlaps with aspect, imperfective, and perfective forms, making it challenging to determine the right verb form. Learners might confuse which verb to use for a specific situation because these categories are closely related but not identical. For example, Я иду в университет. I'm walking to the university. This one is unidirectional, imperfective form, ongoing single trip. Я пошел в университет. I set off to the university. This one is unidirectional, perfective form, completed the act of setting of. This overlap requires learning to think about both the movement itself and the broader context of the action, which can feel daunting. This makes it hard for learners to intuitively grasp these distinctions. For example, I went to the store could mean «Я сходил в магазин», I went and came back. «Я ходил в магазин», I went to the store, but no completion is implied. Learners must learn to think in Russian terms, which requires rewiring how they approach describing movement. Choosing the right motion verb often depends on the situation, make it harder to create simple rules. For example, if you are describing a trip to the park, you might say «Я пошел в парк», I set off for the park. «Я ходил в парк вчера», I went to the park yesterday, and the trip wasn't specifically completed. The correct choice depends on whether you want to emphasize the action, the completion, or the habit. How to overcome these challenges? Tip number 1. Learn in a context. Rather than memorizing lists of verbs, practice them in real-life scenarios. For example, describe your daily routine, weekend plans, or recent trip using motion verbs. Tip number 2. Focus on common verbs first. Start with the most frequently used motion verbs like идти, ходить, to go on foot, and ехать, ездить, to go by vehicle. Once you are comfortable, expand to other verbs like бежать or бегать, to run, and лететь and летать, to fly. And tip number 3. Pay attention to prefixes gradually. Don't try to learn all prefix combinations at once. Focus on the most common ones, по, в, у, с, and practice their meanings in a context. Tip number 4. Practice with visual aids. Use diagrams or illustrations to represent different directions and movements. For example, draw a path for unidirectional and loops for multidirectional verbs. Tip number 5. Speak and write often. Motion verbs are best mastered through the active use. Practice describing your actions aloud or in writing and ask native speakers for feedback. Congratulations! You've just taken a deep dive into one of the most fascinating and complex topics in Russian grammar, motion verbs. Understanding motion verbs gives you a powerful tool for expressing yourself clearly and naturally in Russian language. With this knowledge, you can describe not just where are you going, but how, why, and with what result, adding depth and accuracy to your conversations. Finally, remember, learning motion verbs is like learning to ride a bike. It's tricky at first, but with consistent practice, it becomes a second nature. Every step you take brings you closer to mastering Russian. Thank you for watching this lesson. If you found it helpful, give a thumbs up, share it with fellow learners, and don't forget to subscribe for more lessons on Russian grammar. Let me know in the comments if there is a specific topic you'd like to see next. Удачи!